Welcome back to the Finding Flow State podcast. And this is episode 3, Why for Ownership. Now, this is where we're going to discuss the ownership component of blockchain technology and how transformative that has been. We're going to go over what role it plays in Web3 and in crypto and its history and how we got here. And this is where I'm going to pass you over to Lane, because we need a little bit of history here, Lane, on why did any of this come about in the first place? Like, why was this invented?
Great question. It is so important to know how we got here. And it's easy to lose sight of this because now so much of the news is meme coins. But originally, coin, sort of the first meaningful application of public blockchain technology, which was sort of first published in by a pseudonymous group, Satoshi Nakamoto, in 2008, and was able to sort of become a live network for people to use in 2009. That first paper really talks a lot about the importance of peer-to-peer transactions and just the ability to sort of trust your neighbor, to be self-interested, but the protocol specifically works based on the premise of self-interest. And so there's this like very, very specific argument about, you can't trust anybody, but you can trust them to be self-interested. And if we're all operating in a protocol where your best interest is to be self-interested, but that actually still perpetuates the security of the system for everyone else, it has this sort of intrinsic security and immutability and all of the great properties that we know public blockchains for today. That comes about from this protocol design. And so what started people discussing the importance of peer-to-peer transactions was the lack of that. The 2008 financial crisis showed us exactly what would happen when the world was left for a few people to govern the majority of what was happening to resources. It was quite a mess we found ourselves in 2008. The 2008 financial crisis, I think, just really showed us where the cracks were in the global financial system, and people started to ask questions about how to solve that. And so Bitcoin was born. Thank God for that. Thank the universe for that, because it proved that it was possible for there to be a meaningful platform for entirely anonymous peer-to-peer exchange based just on this cryptographic protocol that assumed self-interest, which seemed like a very reasonable assumption at the time. And so that was sort of the beginning of the experiment that became crypto. But it very quickly, if you think about Bitcoin as a calculator, which is basically the computing power it has now and back then in 2009 when it launched, it's like a calculator. And then I think, Rob, you know this story best, but you can sort of think of Ethereum as a computer to that calculator. So it took the same core concepts around proof of work and the importance of public decentralized systems, and it just amplified everything that was possible by expanding the operations from sort of just simple add subtract kind of stuff all the way to full-blown smart contracts and adding the programming language that we all now know as Solidity. And that really blew the space wide open. So I'll pause here because I know Rob has had a front row seat or was very close to.
Yeah, so the reason I know this is a nerdy one, but I mean, you're listening to a podcast on blockchain, so that's probably a given. So how I got interested in blockchain, as I've discussed in past episodes, was initially gaming and how we could have ownership of digital items, which I don't think is particularly far-fetched and unreasonable to want. The whole world has been becoming more digital for 30 years straight, 40 maybe, where, once you would go and buy a newspaper and now you read it online. Once you would write a letter, now you send an email. Everything's becoming more and more digital. We're digitizing a lot of processes, but we've always had this fundamental problem where you can't own a digital item. They're easily replicable, infinitely replicable. And this was a difficult this is a difficult problem to solve that blockchain solved, even if it wasn't perhaps intended specifically for that purpose. But it is one side of this ownership argument. And the reason Ethereum was created, and this is confirmed by its co-founder Vitalik Buterin, was gaming. So Vitalik Buterin played a game called World of Warcraft, and he played a character on that. And he had a particular spell that his character had that he really liked. And one day he logged in and found out that the developers had changed that spell. And he didn't like the way they'd changed it. And he's suddenly become acutely aware that you just don't own anything. You have no control in the digital arena. You have no ownership in the truest sense of the word. And this led him to create Ethereum. And this is where we start to see, NFTs, as we discussed in the last episode. And we start to see digital item ownership. Now, I'll give my side of this conversation quickly. So the gaming industry in 2022 generated $100 billion in in-game sales and sales of virtual goods. Now, people think they own these items, and it's not naive to think that. I thought that for the longest time. You don't own these items because they can be pulled from you at any time. You could be banned from the game. They could shut the game down. They could take the item off you, and you have basically no recourse. So what we've seen with gaming is basically the most incredible rental market of all time, and where you basically have no rights. You have no control over what happens to these digital items that you thought you owned. And so this is where, for me, this is a profound shift. Is a blockchain allows you to own these items that you've been buying. And this is just one sector. Like gaming is just one sector. And that's $100 billion sector for virtual items. So for me, ownership is complex when it comes to blockchain because you own things like data as well. Gaming is where I've seen kind of the best example of a digital item ownership and how powerful that can be. And now it's just almost like a waiting game to see when that's just going to become the baseline we see across it. But when it comes to Ethereum, gaming took a little while to get started there, but get started it did with CryptoKitties.
Yeah, it sure did. CryptoKitties was a great example. Like we were so excited about what Ethereum was doing and making possible, and it was so clear right away why it was so perfect for gaming for all the reasons you mentioned. Like the fairness, sorry, to be explicit about that, so great for gaming because the fairness of rules is really clear in the smart contract, right? Like you know that you're getting the same spell as everybody else, you know you're getting the same odds as everybody else. And that, yeah, it just makes the game more fun to know that you're playing on a level playing field, I guess. And so, yeah, CryptoKitties was definitely an example of the gaming ecosystem and sort of the initial NFT ecosystem coming to life on Ethereum in sort of the fall, so like August, September of 2017. We started sort of thinking about what to do in the world of crypto. We're looking at all kinds of applications, and this was the summer of ICOs. So there was the world of blockchain sort of starts with just financial transactions with Bitcoin in 2008. Ethereum adds gaming. People don't initially maybe use it to its full potential. And so there's sort of this brief time and sort of when there's a lot of initial coin offerings, ICOs happening. And that certainly was another value prop of ownership, even beyond gaming, because it helped, it legitimized stake in a meaningful enterprise, I guess you could say. Like people got to sort of the way that crowdfunding popularized people putting money behind causes that they were excited about. ICOs were like, this is what it looks like to have digital ownership or stake in collective endeavor. And then, but we didn't know if that was really interesting. Like it was kind of it was an application, definitely, but it wasn't one that, like everyone at the Thanksgiving dinner table could get on board with necessarily. And so we were really trying to sort of think about like, what could people intrinsically understand the concept of true ownership with? And pets are like, people are obsessed with cats. The internet basically runs on cats. And it's clear to people why you would want like a whole cat and your cat and not only part of a cat. And so you're trying to get across these ideas about like, it's your thing. These properties that were not super clear maybe in other contexts became very obvious when we just stuck them on a cat. So in 2017, when CryptoKitties launched, it was a nice way for people to understand some of those very intrinsic properties of like defensibility, and which, in the context of like the music examples that we're using or like accessing a game. In the world of digital, you don't have ownership over stuff, you have access to it. And the access only exists as long as the service provider decides to license it to you. And they will change the terms of that sort of like leasing of the content to you every 6 months when your subscription needs to renew or whatever the terms are, right? And so in the world of blockchain, we get true ownership and we get to see what happens when people truly do get to own their things and set the conditions for them indefinitely. There's no other party that is able to like go into your account and take your cat out of its little house, you know. And that is actually really important. It's like, it's a funny example with the cat, but when it's your entire life savings, it becomes very clear why you would want to make sure that nobody just like went in your house and grabbed all your savings from under your mattress or whatever. And so, yeah, the sort of beginning of this ownership thing, I think really was exemplified in 2000. And now we're all the way to the world of digital goods and defensibility online, when that's just something that we don't have any access to today.
Yeah, I think everybody has kind of something they're drawn to when it comes to the ownership side of crypto. Noah, what drew you to the ownership of crypto? Like, what about blockchain's value add with ownership attracted you the most?
Yeah, I think for me it was the transparency of it all, the fact that, it's something you don't really need to understand in order to trust it. It's like like a car. You don't need to understand how the car works. You just know that when you put your key in, it would probably most times turn on. Well, blockchain is even better because you know that for sure when you put the key in, it will 100% of the times turn on. So that's honestly what really drew me to it. And I think the whole ethos of transparency and honesty through technology is what drove me to it. The thing with ownership for me, well, my point of view, I think if it was more impactful in the areas of finance or the economic autonomy of people, like the financial freedom, because of my background living in a country that had like hyperinflation. There's a lot of value in having your store in a coin or a bill that actually retains that value. You don't want it to be on your country's bill, and then when you go out the next day, you can't really buy anything with it because hyperinflation just drew it out, all the value out of it. So that's for me the way I see the ownership part of it on crypto, ownership of your ownership of your time and the value it has. And from there, just the whole transparency is and all these structures that are based on trust that could be built on blockchain. That's my vision for it. It's just I like to see a lot of people, a lot of countries actually implementing more crypto-based solutions to all of their, I don't know, bureaucracy or all of their legal systems or registration system, identity stuff. Like when people, at least in my country, it happens that you want to get your passport renewed and you go through this process where you gotta go to the website. The website sometimes doesn't work. And then after you get your appointment, you gotta go there, make a line for you. Just spend your whole day just getting your passport renewed, and it's just because their systems are just that good, and they could be replaced by something like blockchain that is just quick, verifiable, and you can even go into it yourself, right? If you can prove you own your identity.
I could not agree more that the problem of like consistently being able to access your resources and your identity across borders, and especially within borders that are maybe not as stable. Like in Noah's example, the local infrastructure is not reliable, but sometimes it's also just it's not compatible, right? Like even going between the US and Canada, when I moved from Canada to the UK, like you would think those would be two countries that are like on the same page. It's like both Commonwealth, colonized place. Like you'd think that they were on the same page about using the same systems. Like not at all, right? Like they can't agree on measurements, can't agree on anything. And so it just makes, like, definitely when your life exists across different borders, it makes such a world of difference to be able to reliably access things within the borders at our home, like in the places that you're visiting, and doing that reliably regardless of sort of the level of local infrastructure available to you, because there's this better global standard that you always have on your phone, and like what a world of difference that makes. So yeah, just could
Yeah,
not agree more with Noah's example.
same. That's all I was going to add to it. I've covered a lot on the podcast, South American countries that have struggled with inflation, and I might be wrong about this, and I haven't got time to check, but I think it was Argentina that was suffering with such bad inflation
Yeah, probably.
that.
Yeah.
So Javier Milei took over.
Yes.
Yeah,
I love
okay, I'm
this
thinking of the right.
subject.
I'm thinking of the right country. Yeah. So their inflation got so bad at one point that people were being paid their wages, and 30 days later, when they're next going to get paid, if they'd just held on to that money, it would be worth half the purchasing power that it was
Yeah.
when they were paid it.
Yeah.
Absolutely insane. So what they
It-
were doing now, the Argentinian government was trying to ban crypto exchanges because they didn't want people using crypto. But crypto was the perfect solution, and people were using these. I can't remember the name. I think they were called caves, crypto caves, where people were going there with their wage on the first of the month and swapping it for stable coins because
yeah.
they knew it's pegged 1-to-1 with the US dollar, and they
Yeah.
knew it was safer, and they wouldn't. Is that right, Noah?
Yeah, definitely. No, I'm saying yes, you're right on everything. Actually, I have a couple of things to say. Just didn't want to interrupt you.
No, go. No, please, please.
Like, well, in Venezuela, it was the same, but you didn't have to wait a month. You just have to wait a day, and the next day you will have half the percentage power. And what they were doing in Argentina before Javier Milei took over, it was stupid, right? Why would you just ban cryptocurrencies? Like, you just it's this government is just trying to suppress everybody from a financial point and control everything, take the money all for themselves. Right? So Javier Milei came over, cut up all the government expenses, and actually brought honesty, which is my main thing in blockchain transparency to the market. Like the prices were reflecting what they were actually supposed to reflect, and it's cutting down on taxes for importing stuff from outside in technological, because Argentina always had this politics around exportation. They didn't want to import anything, and so if you wanted to bring a PlayStation 5 that costs you $500 in the US, and you want to buy in Argentina it will cost you like $1,000 to buy that same PlayStation 5 because of all of these importation taxes. So it's getting rid of all of those things. It's just all about it's all around the theme of bringing transparency to the economy, and blockchain is just perfect for that. I think he also removed the ban on Binance and all of those trading exchanges.
Yeah, absolutely.
Just for the sake of sort of rounding out the situation here, I guess I'll just emphasize that part of the reason lots of governments, and the opinions represented on the podcast are probably pretty clearly pro let people do whatever they want. However, sometimes there's like incredibly misleading information that's put forth online, and people can get wrapped up in something that's like not real or aims to exploit somebody in it, and that's maybe not clear from sort of their initial engagement with however they found this project. And crypto for a period of time was, and in some ways still, was sort of home to people who were trying to scam other people out of money. Lots of the projects, the vast majority of them are legitimate projects that people spend lots of time and effort dedicating their lives to solving these problems, but not all of them. And sometimes telling the difference between the two is really challenging. Governments for a long time, and even still now, have a very difficult time parsing what's safe and what's not. They feel that they have a duty to their citizens to protect them from loss. Unfortunately, the protection from loss is also participating in the upside, which is why people feel strongly that they should be able to take their own risks. I just want to mention that because it is sort of important to know that regulators and governments are not usually, or at least not always, only trying to suppress people. Sometimes they are also, I think, genuinely trying to protect people from harm. And,
Yeah,
it's
definitely.
tough to get that right. So the best projects do what they can to just be really transparent with users, as Noah was saying, so that they can make good, safe choices without having to rely on the integrity of the project.
Yeah, thank you for that.
Not to add too somber a note, but yeah, it's all complicated, right? Because this is such an early industry, and so there is, it's important to know that the regulators are so up in our business all the time, but also, everybody has their motives, and so we got to play nice and figure it out together.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Well, folks, This has been quite a journey through history. We have covered lots of the reasons to use blockchain for the core purpose of even just ownership. So this is just one of the whys that you would use blockchain, but ownership, as we've discussed today, is a very compelling why. And it was definitely one of the first that sort of prompted the beginning of this ecosystem. So we are happy to have discussed it with y'all today. The next important why is for accountability, and that brings up notions of identity and reputation, which Noah definitely loves talking about. So that will be the discussion for next week. This week, there is also an accompanying example that you can work through if you are motivated and would like to. So maybe just before we log off, Noah can give us a quick overview of the homework for the week.
Sure. CryptoKitties Arcade is a platform that teaches the very basics of cadence. It's basically like a zero to hero kind of guide for cadence developers. You can go through the first two chapters of the first episode, or I don't know how to even call it, but in it you will find the very basics of understanding the cadence as a programming languages. And also I have prepared a video tutorial and some materials that I will be posting on Discord, on GitHub publicly, and it shows basically a very basic example of how to use blockchain for daily life problems. And in this example, I teach how to use the Flow blockchain to manage your own savings account.
Thank you so much. Any parting words for us, Rob?
No, not really. Stay up to date. And I think these, although they're optional, these exercises are useful to do. I think there's one thing to learn something from the theory perspective, but to put it into practice, I do think gives you more knowledge than you can get from just reading. I think experimenting with this kind of stuff is important, including interacting with blockchain in any way. You know, like I think we said last week, buy a cheap NFT on Flow or whatever. Just experiment with it. You don't have to spend much money at all. You don't even have to spend anything. You could go and find an airdrop, although we haven't discussed what they are. But you can just interact with blockchain in any way, because I really think it will make a profound difference into how quickly these sort of concepts gel, you know.
Yeah, I feel it's really important to always remember that blockchain is public. Public is part of it, is for everyone to use, is open for anyone to access to, and people just don't really have that present because it's always somebody else that's offering the tools or the user interface to you, and so you gotta go through them. But learning these tools is not really that complicated once you put your mind to it and some time, and it feels really empowering once you actually accomplish something as simple as creating your own account, funding it, and being able to see how much you have, who you can transfer it to, or take it out whenever you want, or even put it on a staking node and start generating value out of it.
Yes, so much to learn. We will cover all of this, but definitely folks should follow along with the tutorials that Noah's putting out, and also jump in the Discord. The link for that is on this page, so feel free to jump in there and jump on a voice call or a video call, and yeah, anybody in there will probably be happy to sort of walk you through it, work through wherever you get stuck. So yeah, there are friends here to help, and definitely, like Rob said, the more you do it, the more it makes sense. Until next week, this has been Finding Flow State.